For the longest time, my sister-in-law, Jenna, and I had a simple, foolproof arrangement. It started back in the early days of the pandemic, when everything was chaos. She'd watch my kids 3 days a week, and I'd watch hers the other 3. No money changed hands, no drama, no complaints. It was one of the few things in our lives that just worked. That was until a few weeks ago, when Jenna decided to blow it all up over something ridiculously petty. Honestly, I can't even remember what sparked the argument. It was that insignificant. Maybe it was about scheduling or some silly misunderstanding. At the time, I figured she'd get over it in a day or 2, so I didn't stress about it. The next morning, I did what I'd done 100 times before. I dropped my kids off at Jenna's house before heading to work. We had this unspoken routine. If one of us was in a rush or not feeling chatty, we'd stay in the car while the kids went inside. That day was no different. I waved at the door when I saw it open, and then I drove off, thinking everything was fine. My commute is about 40 minutes, so I cranked up the music and zoned out, completely unaware that my day was about to take a sharp turn for the worse. By the time I parked and checked my phone, I was hit with a barrage of notifications, 20 missed calls, and countless texts, all from Jenna. The texts started civil enough. She said she wasn't watching my kids that day because of our argument. Okay, not ideal, but manageable. Then the tone shifted. Jenna was ranting about me ignoring her messages, accusing me of dumping my kids on her without warning. The final texts were outright threats. If I didn't pick up my kids within 45 minutes, she was calling the police. I froze. Call the cops? Over this? My stomach twisted into knots. My job involves working with kids, and anything involving child welfare or abandonment accusations could ruin my career. Jenna knew this, and yet she still chose to escalate things like this. I called her immediately, apologizing for not seeing her messages earlier and explaining that my phone had been on silent while I drove. I told her I'd leave work early to get the kids, but she cut me off mid-sentence. "You've got 45 minutes, or I'm calling the cops," she said, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. Speechless, I hung up and scrambled to wrap things up at work. My boss was understanding, but I couldn't just drop everything instantly. By the time I got back to Jenna's place, just over an hour had passed. When I pulled up, 2 squad cars were parked in front of her house, lights flashing. My kids were standing on the porch, visibly scared. I wanted to throw up. Jenna was outside, talking to the officers like she was the victim in all this, her face smug and self-righteous. I got out of the car, took a deep breath, and approached the scene. My first instinct was to yell at Jenna right then and there, but I knew that wouldn't help. Instead, I turned to the officers, trying to explain the situation. "This is a misunderstanding," I said. "I didn't abandon my kids. I dropped them off here this morning, like I always do." I didn't see Jenna's messages until I was already at work. One of the officers gave me a skeptical look. "You didn't see her messages?" he asked, his tone sharp. "No," I said firmly. "I was driving, and my phone was on silent. I called her as soon as I saw the texts and told her I was on my way." Jenna, of course, had to chime in. "I told you I wasn't watching them today," she snapped. "You should have checked your phone before leaving them here. This is on you." Her words made my blood boil, but I kept my composure. "Jenna, that's not an excuse to call the police. You knew I'd come as soon as I could. Do you have any idea what this could have done to me?" She shrugged, completely unfazed. The officers, clearly not eager to get caught in a family dispute, eventually decided no crime had been committed. They left with a warning: "Make sure this doesn't happen again." I gathered my kids and walked them to the car, not sparing Jenna another glance. As I buckled them in, she had the audacity to yell after me, "Maybe next time you'll check your phone." I drove away in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they hurt. The rest of the day was a blur of anger and disbelief. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head. The flashing lights, my kids' scared faces, Jenna acting like she was in the right. She knew exactly what she was doing and how much was at stake for me. and she did it anyway. A few days later, Jenna texted me. Her message was short and to the point. I think I overreacted. Can we go back to the babysitting arrangement? I stared at the text, furious. After everything she'd put me through, she thought we could just go back to normal. I couldn't let it slide. I needed to make it clear that this wasn't okay. No, Jenna, I replied. We're not going back to anything. You called the cops on me, your own family. You knew what that could have done to me, and you didn't care. I'm not babysitting for you again. Figure it out. Her response came almost immediately, twisting the blame back onto me. If you had just checked your phone, none of this would have happened. She even tried to guilt me, saying, I warned you. You brought this on yourself. I couldn't believe her nerve. This is not my fault, I shot back. You crossed a line, and I'm done. I blocked her number after that. I thought it would be the end of it, but I was wrong. Jenna wasn't going to let this go so easily. And things were about to get even messier. Blocking Jenna's number felt like a small victory, but I knew it wasn't the end. If there was one thing I'd learned about Jenna over the years, it was that she didn't back down easily. She had a way of turning everything into a spectacle, and this situation was no different. A few days after cutting off contact, my mom called. The moment I heard her voice, I knew Jenna had gotten to her. Alex, she started, her tone already teetering between concern and accusation. What's going on with you and Jenna? She's saying you're refusing to babysit and that it's causing all kinds of problems. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Mom, did she also tell you she called the police on me? Because that's what happened. There was a pause on the other end of the line. She mentioned something about that, Mom admitted, her voice uncertain. But she said it was a misunderstanding, that she was just trying to get your attention. Trying to get my attention, I repeated, my voice rising. Mom, she threatened to ruin my career. My kids were terrified. How is that a misunderstanding? She said you dropped them off without asking. Like I've done 100 times before, I interrupted. We had a system, Mom. She decided to change the rules without telling me. And instead of handling it like an adult, she called the cops. And now she wants to pretend it didn't happen. Mom sighed heavily. I don't know, Alex. She's your sister-in-law. Can't you just work it out? No, I said firmly. Not this time. She crossed a line, and I'm not babysitting for her anymore. She can figure it out. Mom didn't push any further, but I could tell she wasn't thrilled with my decision. By the time I hung up, my head was pounding. I knew Jenna was going to spin this her way, and it wouldn't take long for the rest of the family to start chiming in. Sure enough, over the next week, the texts and calls started trickling in. My brother Kevin, who'd always been Jenna's biggest defender, called to tell me I was being unreasonable. Come on, Alex, he said, frustration clear in his voice. She said she's sorry. She was stressed out, okay? You're seriously going to hold this against her forever. Kevin, do you even hear yourself? I shot back. She called the cops on me. On me. She knew what that could have done to my job, to my kids. And she didn't care. A half-hearted apology doesn't fix that. She was just trying to make a point, he argued. And she made it, I said coldly, loud and clear. The conversation ended there, but it didn't stop the comments from rolling in. Jenna was painting herself as the victim, claiming I was overreacting and punishing her for one little mistake. And while some family members stayed out of it, others couldn't resist weighing in. A family shouldn't hold grudges, Aunt Linda said during one of her unsolicited calls. You've got to think about the bigger picture. You should forgive her, my cousin Sarah texted. It's not worth the drama. Everyone seemed to have an opinion, but none of them were there that day. None of them saw the police cars in Jenna's driveway or the fear on my kids' faces. None of them knew what it felt like to have someone you trusted use the system against you. The only person who truly understood was my best friend, Jamie. When I told her what happened, she didn't mince words. Jenna's a manipulative jerk, she said bluntly. You're better off cutting her out completely. And if anyone gives you grief about it, that's their problem, not yours. Her words were a lifeline. For so long, I'd been trying to keep the peace, to smooth things over for the sake of family. But Jenna's actions had made it clear. Some bridges are better left burned. As the weeks went on, I stuck to my decision. I focused on my kids, my job, and the things that actually mattered. It wasn't easy though. Family gatherings became awkward, with Jenna shooting me icy glares from across the room, and Kevin barely speaking to me. Mom kept trying to mediate, saying things like, "Jenna's really struggling without the babysitting arrangement," or, "I think she's genuinely sorry, Alex." But I wasn't budging. Jenna had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. If that meant she had to figure out her own childcare, so be it. Then, one day, Jenna decided to take things a step further. She posted a long, dramatic rant on social media, accusing me of being selfish and tearing the family apart. She didn't mention me by name, but it was obvious who she was talking about. "Some people just can't let go of petty grudges," she wrote. "It's sad when family refuses to help, especially when kids are involved." I saw the post when a mutual friend sent it to me with a simple caption. Wow, I was furious. Jenna wasn't just trying to guilt trip me privately anymore. She was dragging our drama into the public eye. For a moment, I considered responding, setting the record straight. But then I stopped myself. What was the point? Anyone who knew the full story would see through her nonsense, and anyone who didn't wasn't worth convincing. Instead, I blocked her on every platform. If Jenna wanted to play the victim, she could do it without me. After blocking Jenna on every platform, I felt a brief sense of relief, like I'd finally taken back some control. But the ripple effects of her actions didn't stop there. Family gatherings became a battlefield of passive-aggressive comments and icy stares, with Jenna playing the victim at every opportunity. At the next family dinner, I walked in with my kids, determined to focus on them and ignore the drama. But the moment I stepped into the dining room, Jenna was already in full performance mode. "It's just so hard these days," she sighed loudly to Aunt Linda, who was nodding along sympathetically. "Without reliable help, you know, it's tough to juggle everything." I clenched my jaw, pretending I didn't hear her, and ushered my kids to their seats. Jenna's eyes flicked to me, daring me to respond, but I refused to take the bait. Dinner was a mix of forced politeness and subtle digs. Kevin barely spoke to me, and every time I tried to make conversation with him, he gave one-word answers before turning back to Jenna. At one point, she even had the audacity to bring up the babysitting arrangement, as if it had been a mutual decision to end it. "I just miss the way things used to be," she said, with a wistful smile. "Back when we all worked together like a real family." I nearly choked on my water. "Work together?" I repeated, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. "You mean back when I was watching your kids 6 days a week for free?" Jenna's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "It wasn't about the money, Alex. It was about helping each other out." "Funny," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I don't remember calling the cops on you when things got tough." The room went silent. Jenna's face flushed red, and Kevin muttered something under his breath, but no one else said a word. I didn't feel triumphant, though, just tired. Tired of the games, the blame shifting, and the endless drama. After dinner, my mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Did you really have to say that?" she asked, her tone somewhere between exasperation and pleading. "You're only making things worse." "Mom, she's been playing the victim all night," I said, keeping my voice low so the kids wouldn't hear. "What am I supposed to do? Let her get away with it?" "Maybe just let it go," she said, her eyes softening. For the sake of the family, that phrase hit a nerve. "For the sake of the family," I repeated, my voice sharper than I intended. "Mom, she called the police on me. She dragged my kids into this. And now she's trying to rewrite history to make herself look good. How is that my responsibility to fix?" Mom sighed, rubbing her temples. "I just want everyone to get along." "I know," I said, softening a little. But this isn't something I can just forget. Jenna's actions have consequences, and she needs to face them. Mom didn't respond, but I could see the frustration in her eyes. She wasn't used to me standing my ground like this, and honestly, neither was I. But I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. Over the next few weeks, I focused on creating a sense of normalcy for my kids. We started spending more time with friends and other family members who weren't caught up in the drama. Jamie, my best friend, became a constant source of support, always ready with a sarcastic comment or a bottle of wine when I needed to vent. "You're doing the right thing," she said one night as we sat on my couch, the kids asleep upstairs. "Jenna's the type of person who thrives on control. By cutting her out, you're taking away her power. I just hate how it's affecting the rest of the family," I admitted. "Kevin barely talks to me anymore, and Mom's constantly trying to mediate. It feels like I'm the one tearing everyone apart." "Trust me, you're not," Jamie said firmly. "Jenna's the one who created this mess. You're just refusing to play her game. That's not your fault." Her words helped, but the guilt still lingered. No matter how justified I felt, a part of me couldn't shake the nagging doubt that maybe I could have handled things differently. But every time I replayed the events in my head, I came to the same conclusion. Jenna had crossed a line, and I wasn't responsible for cleaning up her mess. As time went on, the family tension didn't exactly disappear, but it started to settle into a new normal. I kept my distance from Jenna and Kevin, focusing instead on the people who truly supported me. My kids were happier too, no longer caught in the crossfire of adult drama. One evening, as I was tucking them into bed, my youngest, Lily, looked up at me and said, "Are we ever going to Aunt Jenna's house again?" I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "Probably not, sweetie," I said finally. "But that's okay. We have lots of other people who love us." She nodded, satisfied with my answer, and snuggled under the blankets. As I turned off the light and closed the door, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. For all the chaos Jenna had caused, she hadn't taken away the most important thing, the bond I had with my kids. As time passed, I learned to live with the new reality. The fallout from Jenna's actions wasn't something I could erase, but I could choose how much space it took up in my life. And the more I focused on my kids and the people who truly cared about us, the less Jenna's drama seemed to matter. Of course, that didn't mean she stopped trying to stir the pot. Every so often, I'd hear through the family grapevine that she was still complaining about me, painting herself as the victim. "Alex just doesn't care about family," she apparently told Aunt Linda during one of their chats. "It's sad how selfish some people can be." I stopped reacting to her nonsense. If Jenna wanted to twist the story, that was her business. I had bigger things to focus on, like making sure my kids felt secure and loved, no matter what. And honestly, cutting Jenna out of our lives was the best decision I'd made in years. One of the most surprising things was how quickly my kids adapted. At first, I worried they'd miss spending time with their cousins, but they hardly mentioned it. Instead, we found new ways to fill our days. Movie nights at home, trips to the park, and weekends spent with friends who felt more like family than some of my actual relatives. My oldest, Ethan, took it all in stride. At 9 years old, he was wise beyond his years, often picking up on things I thought I'd hidden well. One afternoon, as we were driving home from school, he asked, "Mom, why don't we see Aunt Jenna anymore?" The question caught me off guard, but I kept my tone calm. "Sometimes grown-ups don't get along," I explained, "and it's better for everyone if we take some space." He nodded thoughtfully. "She wasn't very nice to you, huh?" "No," I admitted. "She wasn't. But it's not your job to worry about that. My job is to keep you and Lily happy and safe, and that's what I'm doing." That seemed to satisfy him, and the conversation moved on to more pressing matters, like whether we could stop for ice cream on the way home. But his question lingered in my mind. I realized how much my kids had noticed, even when I thought I was shielding them from the worst of it. It made me even more determined to set the right example for them. Meanwhile, my relationship with Kevin was still strained. He and Jenna were a package deal. and as long as I kept my distance from her, he seemed determined to keep his distance from me. It hurt, more than I wanted to admit. Kevin and I had been close growing up, and I missed the easy camaraderie we used to share. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I decided to reach out. I didn't want to rehash the drama or beg for reconciliation. I just wanted to see if there was any chance of salvaging our relationship. I sent him a simple text. "Hey, I miss how things used to be between us. Can we talk?" It took him a few hours to reply, and when he did, his response was lukewarm at best. "I don't know, Alex. Things are complicated right now." I stared at the screen, frustration bubbling up inside me. I'd expected resistance, but it still stung. After everything Jenna had done, Kevin was still choosing to stand by her, even if it meant pushing me away. Instead of replying, I set my phone down and took a deep breath. I couldn't force Kevin to see things my way, and I couldn't change his loyalty to Jenna. What I could do was focus on the people who showed up for me, the ones who made an effort to understand my side of the story. One of those people was my mom. She'd been hesitant at first, always trying to play peacemaker, but over time she started to see the bigger picture. During a visit one weekend, as we sat in her backyard, watching the kids play, she turned to me and said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about Jenna crossing a line. I didn't get it at first, but I think I do now." Her words caught me off guard. "Really?" I asked, unsure of what had changed. She nodded. "I've been watching how she talks about you to other people, the way she twists the story. It's not fair, and I'm sorry if I made you feel like you had to fix things when it wasn't your job." Hearing that from her was like a weight lifting off my chest. For so long, I'd felt like I was fighting this battle alone, but knowing my mom was starting to understand made all the difference. "It's not easy, Mom," I said. "I wish things could be different, but I can't keep letting her treat me like this. I have to set boundaries, for me and for the kids." "I know," she said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "And I'm proud of you for doing that." That moment felt like a turning point. I couldn't control Jenna or Kevin, or how they chose to handle things, but I could focus on the relationships that mattered most. And slowly but surely, I started to feel more at peace with the choices I'd made. In the weeks and months that followed, life started to feel a little more stable. Jenna's drama, once a constant storm cloud over my head, began to fade into the background. She was still out there, complaining to whoever would listen, but I stopped caring. Her opinion didn't define me, and her approval wasn't something I needed anymore. What surprised me most was how much lighter I felt. Setting boundaries had been scary, but it also gave me a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, I wasn't bending over backward to keep the peace or sacrificing my own happiness to appease someone else. I was living life on my terms, and it felt good. My kids noticed the change too. Ethan, ever the observant one, made a comment one evening while we were playing cards at the kitchen table. "You seem happier, Mom," he said, his little brow furrowed in concentration as he dealt the cards. "Like you're not worried all the time." I smiled, ruffling his hair. "I am happier," I said, "because I'm focusing on what really matters." He nodded, satisfied with my answer, and went back to the game. That simple moment meant everything to me. It reminded me why I'd made the hard choices, to protect my kids, to show them that it's okay to stand up for yourself, and to create a life where they felt safe and loved. My relationship with Kevin remained distant, but I'd come to accept it for what it was. I couldn't force him to see my side, and I wasn't going to chase after a connection that felt so one-sided. If he ever decided to reach out, I'd be open to it, but I wasn't holding my breath. In the meantime, I poured my energy into the people who showed up for me without conditions. My mom, my friends, and of course, my kids. One weekend, Jamie and I sat in my backyard, watching Ethan and Lily chase each other around while we sipped on iced tea. Jamie had been my rock through all of this, and I couldn't help but feel grateful for her unfiltered honesty and unwavering support. "You know," she said, glancing at me over the rim of her glass, "I don't think I've ever seen you this relaxed. It's like you've finally let go of all the crap Jenna threw at you. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. I think I have, I admitted. It's weird though. For so long, I was angry. At Jenna, at Kevin, even at myself for not standing up sooner. But now, it's like I don't have room for that anger anymore. That's because you've grown, Jamie said, giving me a pointed look. You've learned how to set boundaries and protect your peace. That's huge. She was right. It wasn't just about cutting Jenna out of my life. It was about reclaiming my own power, about deciding what kind of energy I wanted in my world, and refusing to settle for anything less. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was mine. As the seasons changed, so did my perspective. The tension with Jenna and Kevin still lingered on the edges of family events, but it didn't consume me the way it once did. When I saw them, I was polite but distant, maintaining the boundaries I'd worked so hard to build. And while it wasn't the resolution I'd hoped for, it was one I could live with. One evening, as I was tucking Lily into bed, she looked up at me with her big, curious eyes and asked, "Are we happy now, Mom?" The question caught me off guard, but I didn't hesitate. "Yeah, baby," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We're happy, and we're safe. That's all that matters." As I turned off the light and closed her door, I felt a deep sense of contentment settle over me. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Looking back, I realized that this entire ordeal had taught me more than I ever expected. It taught me the value of boundaries, the importance of standing up for myself, and the power of focusing on the people who truly matter. Jenna's actions had tested me in ways I wouldn't wish on anyone, but they also forced me to grow, and for that, I was grateful. Family isn't always the people you're born into. It's the people who show up, who love you unconditionally, and who make you feel like you belong. And as I looked around at the life I'd built, I knew I had exactly that. I wasn't just moving forward, I was thriving. And nothing Jenna or anyone else said could take that away from me. Story 2. My wife boasted that she would take half of my hard-earned money after cheating with my cousin. She had no idea, though, that I was ahead of her by one step. You wish to help the channel because you like these stories. Remember to click the subscribe button. It greatly benefits our channel. Let's begin the video now. OP says, "Hey everyone, in the beginning, have you ever been stabbed in the back by someone you devoted everything to? I have a story for you though. Allow me to take you back to the beginning. I'm Gabriel, and I'm now 54 years old. However, this narrative began over 5 years ago. I was 49, confident and successful, and a little restless, if I may be honest. I had a steady life, stability that most people long for but seldom obtain. I was respected, wealthy, and free to do as I wanted. My wife died unexpectedly when I was in my late 30s, leaving me with 2 children, Sophie and Ethan. I devoted my life to raising my children. However, I had no one with whom to share my life after they grew up and established their lives, following the death of my wife. And as the years passed, that absence became more acute. But I wasn't completely alone. My 39-year-old male cousin, Marco, had always supported me, acting as if he were my brother. As children, we were inseparable and grew up together, and he grew to be a reliable member of my inner circle over the years. Marco was more than just a relative. I knew I could rely on him, someone who was a master of charm, but a disaster in execution, but whom I believed I could always trust. Jumping from one failed venture to the next, a boutique that folded, an app that vanished. We always laughed about it. Then I met Christina. It was at a charity gala in the heart of Manhattan. One of those events where everyone was there to rub elbows and prove they belonged. I wasn't expecting anything beyond another night of polite conversation and calculated networking. But then she walked in. Christina was radiant. At just 24, she had this effortless charm that drew everyone's attention. Her laughter filled the room like music, and her smile could stop time. She wasn't just beautiful. She was magnetic. I couldn't take my eyes off her. When I eventually summoned the bravery to approach her, I felt like a teenager again, nervous and uncertain of myself. "Gabriel," I responded, offering my hand, trying to disguise the fact that my heart was thumping. "Christina," she answered, her voice light, her handshake strong. There was something in her eyes, a spark that made me feel like I was the only man in the room. We spent the remainder of the evening conversing. It didn't matter that she was younger than me, or that we hailed from very different worlds. In those few hours, it felt like we'd known each other forever. She told me about her dreams, her love for travel, and her ambition to see everything life has to offer. I was captivated. Our connection evolved over the following few months. Christina was able to elevate the ordinary to the exceptional. Even a simple supper seemed like a journey. A peaceful evening at home seemed like something from a romance book. I laughed at her. She put me to the test, and I felt alive for the first time in years. She enthusiastically accepted my universe when I introduced it to her. Christina was a sucker for five-star hotels, private planes, and fancy vehicles, but at the time, it didn't seem shallow. She gave me the impression that she loved me, not only the life that I could give. In retrospect, I question whether that was the first falsehood I told myself. She also got to know Marco and all the other people I cared about throughout the months. He was his typical gregarious self, enticing her with his pleasant disposition and simple jokes. Christina blended well in with my family. That is what I believed at the time. I recall being so proud of her as I saw her giggle at Marco. Tales about the two most significant individuals in my life, developing a personal friendship. Speaking of Marco, ever since Christina came into my life, he has been promoting his most recent venture, a vague tech business that he said will transform data security. At family get-togethers, he spoke about it endlessly, including buzzwords like disruption and synergy into his presentation, without providing a clear description of the real work that the company accomplished. But I started to become tired of his perseverance. I had avoided his pitches for years. However, I started to change my mind when Christina began supporting his beliefs as well. One evening, Christina said, "You really ought to give it some thought. Her excitement is contagious. Marco is about to do something significant. All he needs is someone to have faith in him." I became doubtful after hearing her remarks. I trusted Christina, but I didn't trust Marco's history. I wanted to help him, to give him the opportunity he had been pleading for. She was a positive impact on me. With these kind actions, she increased my affection for her, for me to improve my relationships with my loved ones. Before long, I made a proposal. I didn't cut any corners. A string quartet performing her favorite song, a custom-designed diamond ring, and a romantic meal aboard a Mediterranean yacht. I felt like the luckiest man alive when she said yes. Our Hamptons Estates gardens served as the venue for our lavish wedding. From the Holland-imported flowers to the famous chef who created the food, every element was flawless. Christina was a vision in white as she walked down the aisle. "This is it," I told myself. "I will always have this." We had a happy first few years of marriage. We gave lavish parties that were the buzz of town, took leisurely weekends in our penthouse with a view of Central Park, and traveled the world. I made sure Christina had everything she could possibly desire. Even yet, there were hints of tiny, nearly undetectable fissures in the facade. Sometimes she would joke that I was too predictable, or say that she wanted more excitement. I dismissed it with a grin, attributing it to her light-hearted disposition. I was giving her everything after all. What more could she ask for? I was unaware at the time, but those fissures were the earliest signs of things to come, and I disregarded them all because I was so overcome by love and faith. It's amusing how blinding love can be. You see what you want to see because of it, listen to what you'd want to hear, and have the belief that you wish to have. I firmly felt that Christina loved me just as much as I loved her throughout those initial years. But as I would discover later, love isn't always sufficient. If you offer something to someone who doesn't know how to appreciate it, sometimes it will never be enough. And that person, as I would learn, was Christina. The fissures in our idyllic existence were only the start. Everything I believed to be true about her, love, and myself was completely destroyed by what transpired next. However, all I initially saw was the joy, the beauty, and the prospect of a lifetime of bliss. Christina was everything to me. I just had no idea how much it would all cost. Christina and I settled into what I believed to be the ideal existence after our lavish wedding. I put forth a lot of effort to make sure we got everything we could possibly desire. It was more than simply a tool. I used it as my love language to let her know that she was the most important person in my life. Christina, too. In the world I had created for her, she flourished. She used our Manhattan penthouse as a playground. She loved the view of Central Park that it overlooked. "You've given me a dream, Gabriel," she would remark as she stood by the window, looking at the city lights. That was nice to hear, as if my efforts were rewarded. I wished for her happiness, and it was always worth it when I saw her grin. Christina developed into a socialite quite fast. She turned to become the focal point of every gathering we had. Everyone envied and admired this woman. She took over my universe, and I was glad to let her be the center of attention. We went on and on. Summers in the French Riviera, Hamptons weekends, stays in Aspen for the winter. La Romana in the Dominican Republic was her favorite place to visit. She adored the private homes, the turquoise lakes, and the seclusion. We lived like we were in a fairy tale for years, but there are shadows in fairy tales too. The earliest indications of problems were so little that they were hardly invisible. Although Christina had always been gregarious, she started going out more frequently over time. I initially did it with friends I knew and trusted from the charitable circles, but over time other names started to appear. I only met a few friends at the gallery. With a nonchalant dismissal, she would say, "I didn't give it much thought. Since Christina was young, I wanted her to feel liberated rather than constrained by our different ages." Her excuses, however, became more numerous as she began to return home later and later. Weaker. "It was simply an amazing evening. In any case, you wouldn't have liked it," she would chuckle. I began to have a persistent doubt in the back of my mind. Was this typical? Being suspicious, I blamed it on my fears related to the age gap between us. I convinced myself that I had no reason to doubt Christina, since she was just relishing her youth. She constantly reminded me that she loved me when she returned home. After all, I heard her on the phone one evening as I passed the study. Even though her voice was low, almost a whisper, the words I heard were piercing enough to pierce me. She added, "He's great for stability." And then she laughed quietly. "However, he is really dull. He's Gabriel. After all, what should I have done? Refuse a man who has that much money?" Unable to move or breathe, I stood still. Was I the subject of her conversation? She must be. Despite my want to barge in and demand an explanation, I was unable to do so. I couldn't move my legs, and my head was too busy to think clearly. Her comments kept playing in my brain all night, so I gently moved away, acting as though I hadn't heard anything. Boring stability. My name sounded more like a duty than a treasure. I made an effort to appear normal the following morning, but something had changed. I took a closer look at her and saw details I had previously missed. The incessant way she looked at her phone, the unexpected outburst of laughing over texts she wouldn't share, the new acquaintances who are always younger, livelier, and not from our typical social group. I wasn't going to make snap judgments without good proof. I already had a gut feeling, but I wanted concrete evidence to support it. I was not going into this blind. I told Marco one evening that Christina had been behaving aloof. He laughed and waved it away. "She is young. Probably all Gabe needs is a little thrill." Don't make too many assumptions. I was reassured by his statements, and for a time I thought he was correct. But soon enough, the evidence started to surface. Christina's phone lighted up with a message one evening when she was taking a shower, and I wasn't going to pass up the chance to confirm that the communication was from Elle. It said, I am eager to meet you once more. I adore you." My blood froze. This was not a companion. That's not how friends communicate. Unaware of the fury that was building within of me, Christina emerged from the shower. I remained silent. Not quite yet. I had to realize what I was up against. I began putting the pieces together. The mysterious phone calls, the late hours, and her emotional distance from me all suggested the same thing. Not being faithful was Christina's behavior. At my cousin Marco's place, during a family supper, there was still another straw. Although Christina had always been cordial with my family, her laughter with Marco that evening felt unique. Too close, too familiar. I became aware of the lingering looks and the inside jokes that I was not involved in. At one point, we all entered the home together. They said they were coming and stayed out for a while. I went to see how she was doing after noticing her disappearance. Marco was coming closer to her as she stood too near to him and smiled shyly. I called on her right away in a firm, steady voice. I nearly spoiled the entire evening, but I was too mature to act like a kid. I went my own separate ways. I quickly realized that there was a connection between them. Of course, the treachery wasn't limited to strangers, as any conscious guy would see. With someone I trusted, that is, someone with my blood, my cousin. I was so angry and out of breath at the discovery. There was more to this than infidelity. On a deeper level than I had anticipated, it was about betrayal. Still, I remained silent. I needed time to think things through and decide what to do next. This was a precise circumstance. Everything seemed to be slipping out of my grasp after I had spent years creating a stable and controlled existence. I knew it was only a matter of time until everything fell apart, since the gaps in our opulent existence had grown into fissures. Christina misjudged me, though, if she believed she could get away with this. The fragments of Christina's treachery started to come together after that evening at Marco's. I was unable to ignore it any longer. The love of my life, the lady to whom I had dedicated my entire being. I had been misled by my partner. Furthermore, the falsehoods weren't little ones. They were ruthless, cunning, and profound. I spent days living in a daze, swinging between anger and sadness. Every suspicious moment and odd glance she had with Marco was repeated in my head, and she was unable to explain every late night. I refrained from confronting her right away. I was looking for further proof. Marco might not have done it. Christina's phone turned into a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. She was sleeping late one night when I finally plucked up the guts to open it. Scrolling over her texts made my hands shake. However, what I discovered made my stomach turn. Marco L. sent several SMS. I recognized him. During one of their chats, she brought up his name. Explicit, obscene messages that were unmistakable. While I was working late, they made jokes about their planned get-togethers and their stolen time. A dagger to the chest was how it felt. This was her way of saying thank you for everything I had provided her. And with my cousin Marco, of all people, someone I had known as a child, someone I trusted, someone I treated like a brother. It wasn't just Marco, though. Others were present. Flirtatious conversations with people I didn't know by name. I received messages confirming meetings at fancy hotels I had never visited. Christina was considerably more eager for adventure than I had thought she would be. I sat in my office that evening. A folder with all of the damning lies, texts, images, and supporting documentation was in front of me. Christina believed she had done a great job hiding. I allowed myself to feel the weight of it for a time. The years I had squandered and the affection I had lavished on someone who never deserved it. I carefully and slowly breathed before putting the folder in the safe. Not quite yet. It would feel good to face her now. Yes, watching her wriggle would be satisfying, but it wouldn't be sufficient. I required a precise plan. I had to destroy her life, the way she attempted to take mine apart, carefully, purposefully, and without any possibility of recovery. My phone buzzed on the desk as I was shutting the safe. My oldest buddy, Charles, was there. He invited me to join him for supper. My initial reaction was to say no. What was the point, after all? I had closed myself off from everything and everyone else for so long, enclosing myself in a cocoon of work, home, and Christina. But I was halted by something. It may have been fatigue, or perhaps it was a life's subtle whisper. There was a time when I had one full of people who truly cared about me. In the weeks that followed, I made measured progress. I had a meeting with my attorney. Christina's connection to my world was gradually but surely shut off, and assets were moved out of our common accounts. She was still unaware, too busy with her pointless shopping sprees and countless ladies' evenings. Every little step seemed like a triumph. I experienced a brief moment of satisfaction when the combined credit card was denied for the first time. Christina, pretending to be confused, barged into the apartment that night. "There must be a mistake, Gabriel." Waving the card in my face, she said. I said in a cool, almost indifferent tone, "I'll look into it." She didn't ask further questions, too arrogant to acknowledge the embarrassment. But for me, it wasn't about the money. The goal was to undermine her faith in all I had given her. She had no idea that this was only the start. After that, I began to make amends with Marco. First, since I had no other option after meeting this reliable man. His arrogant manner, his persistent attention to Christina, and the tactful way he constantly brought up his business. Everything was too planned. I made the decision to face him head-on once I finally put everything together. Don't be theatrical, not a warning, just the facts, pure and unadulterated. One evening I summoned him to my office. He exuded nonchalant arrogance and a false sense of assurance. "How are you, cousin?" As if we were simply catching up over coffee, he added, settling into the chair opposite from me. I wasted no time. "Stop it, Marco. I am aware of your actions." For half a second, he froze. I caught the glimmer of shame in his eyes, but only for a brief moment. "What are you discussing?" "Christina and you." Leaning forward, I said, "The secret gatherings, the late-night conversations. How you've been utilizing her to further your commercial goals. Do you believe that I am blind?" Marco grinned. I had witnessed him employ this protective technique 100 times. "Gabriel, hurry up. You're making too many assumptions about this. Christina has just encouraged me in my endeavors. She is aware of how difficult it has been for me to get investors. She also believed that I may, she thought. What? I cut myself off like ice. Invest in your fraud, since she requested that I do so. Because while you were warming up to the notion, she did the same for me." "What?" Exchanging secrets, more sharing. A fake serenity took the place of Marco's smirk. "It sounds like what you're saying." "Marco, please don't play dumb and offend me. I lost my temper. You've been using my wife to push this angle for months. To line your pockets is my wife. How can a guy treat his own family that way?" He moved in his chair uneasily. He answered, "You're overreacting." But his voice was trembling, which betrayed him. "Gabriel, Christina, and I have just been conversing. That's all. Speaking. So why does she have a coded version of your name saved on her phone? Why am I receiving texts from her stating that she will ensure that I recognize the worth of your Dreckish startup?" Marco's calmness broke as his cheeks reddened. "I didn't mean to do this to you, you see. What wasn't intended by this?" Now, with my hands clenched at my sides, I demanded, "To get caught, to explode up in your face. Do you really believe I have no idea what sort of man you are? Do you really believe I don't see how you've been attempting to control me and influence her?" To preserve face, he stood up. "You're completely mistaken, Gabriel," he responded, raising his voice. "Christina approached me. It's her. Do not attempt to place the blame on her." I interrupted him. I said, "She is at fault, yes, but you and your loved ones. Even though you understood precisely what you were doing, you went ahead and did it." The air between us was thick with years of shared history, suddenly fractured by treachery, and we gazed at each other for a time. "This is something you will regret." There was a hollow menace in his voice. "No, Marco," I said icily. "You are the only one who will regret this. And by the time I'm finished, nobody will want to touch your name or your business." Marco slammed the door behind him and rushed away, but I was unfazed by his rage. If anything, it strengthened my determination. Considerably, though I knew the next confrontation would be considerably more difficult. I refused to give up. The next thing Christina had to do was confront reality. And there was no getting around it this time. Let's go on to Christina. I wasn't going to mindlessly enter the web of falsehoods she had constructed. If she believed I was about to lose it, I had to consider this. She was mistaken. One thing worked in my favor. She was unaware that I had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. Since the day I signed them, the annulment documents have been in my office, safe and undamaged, almost 10 years prior. When I was still in the honeymoon stage, I had them drawn up when we were at La Romana, both literally and metaphorically. It wasn't that I didn't believe Christina at the time. I did it because I was aware of the dangers of being a guy in my role. People are drawn to wealth, and not all of them are well-meaning. The annulment was the worst-case situation, I assured myself. I would never need to utilize it. However, it seemed like my salvation now. You know what? Christina had no idea that we weren't officially wed. She believed she had created a permanent claim to all I possessed. Her first error was that I had been waiting for the right time, silent, secluded, where she was unable to deflect or run. The opportunity to eat dinner in the penthouse was exactly what I needed. Pretending to be the guy she believed she could still control, I laid the table myself. But behind it all, I was cool and collected. Every word I spoke and every glance I made contributed to the plan. Christina believed she was in control. She was going to discover how mistaken she was. As always, Christina looked lovely, her smile bright and her makeup perfect. She didn't know what was going to happen. Today I met Marco. As I sliced into my steak, I murmured nonchalantly. Her fork stopped in mid-stride. "How is he doing, I wonder?" "All right. He brought you up," I said, looking her in the eye. "Said that you two had been hanging out." She made up a chuckle. "Oh, Gabriel, hurry up. I was with Marco. Avoid being absurd. He is related." "That's right." I found it repulsive, since I stated it in a frigid voice. Her smile vanished entirely. "What are you discussing?" I reclined in my seat and gazed at her. "Christina is someone I know. I am aware of Marco. I am aware of the others. Don't act foolish. The texts are visible to me." Her face became white, and she found herself speechless for the first time. She stumbled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Keep it." I raised my voice and yelled. "Do you consider me foolish? Is it possible that I haven't noticed the late hours, the falsehoods, how you behave in his presence? Christina, you've been taking advantage of me all along. To you, I've only been a paycheck." Her voice broke, and tears filled her eyes as she attempted to deny it. "This is not how it was intended to be." She eventually stopped the deed and muttered, "I had no intention of that happening." The crocodile tears were a typical sight. "It didn't happen because of you." I gave a sour laugh. "What did you intend to happen then?" "Till you locate your next victim, to drain me dry." Her quiet was quite telling. She was aware that she had been apprehended and that there was no escape. However, rather of offering an apology, she became defensive. "Gabriel, you're not flawless. You're uninteresting, predictable. Are you familiar with what it's like to be married to someone who values work more than I do?" It hurt what she said. However, I kept them hidden. "You were the most important thing to me. I gave you everything you could possibly want," I said icily. "You also tossed everything out. Marco was worth it, I hope. Because you will have nothing when you leave this marriage." She was perplexed, her tears pausing briefly. "What are you saying?" I grinned, then grinned a little cruelly. "Christina, we never got married. In any case, legally, 4 months following our wedding, I dissolved the union. In a technical sense, you have only been a very costly girlfriend." The impact of what I had spoken caused her face to crumple. "You're telling lies." She shook her head and murmured, "Am I?" I said, as I pushed the annulment documents across the table after taking them out of my suitcase. Check it out for yourself. She was really taken aback. How did this occur? When? Do you recall, La Romana? You were drinking drinks and having a fool's time when I inquired in a chilly, purposeful voice. You were unaware that you were already divorced. Her hands were shaking as she snatched up the papers, her gaze sweeping over the content. She gave me a startled, irate, and dejected look as she turned to face me again. You're a jerk, she spat. Christina, no, I said, getting to my feet. You are that. We're done now. She was sitting there in startled quiet when I left. The conflict had not yet ended. The consequences of her treachery were only getting started, or to stir. As I shut the door behind me, Christina's cries reverberate throughout the penthouse. I didn't give a damn. The first time in 10 years, her presence no longer carried any weight, and I felt oddly at ease. I was clueless about where to go. Her dishonesty had tarnished my house, my haven. I thus made the decision to visit the one location where I had consistently received clarity. My lawyer contacted the office early the next morning. Gabriel, do you really want to do this in front of others? His tone was guarded as he inquired. Let's keep it quiet. Make all the arrangements behind closed doors. No, I answered firmly. She is not worthy of silence. I want the repercussions to be felt by her. The annulment papers, in her opinion, were only the first step. I took her name off of all vehicles, real estate, and even joint memberships in select clubs. By the end of the day, Christina's life had changed from private planes and penthouses to a guest room at her friend's apartment and 4 bags. She started phoning me nonstop within days, leaving voicemails that varied from heartfelt apologies to direct threats. She cried in a single message, Gabriel, you can't do this to me. I spent the finest years of my life with you. I cherished you. With a sour laugh, I erased the voicemail. Perhaps the happiest years of her life. But over those years, she had been stealing from me and pursuing her passions behind my back. It had nothing to do with love. For what reason was she waiting? I want to die and live a happy life. With my money being used by my cousin, I became increasingly aware of the authority I had regained as her desperation increased. However, the consequences went beyond money. In a manner I hadn't expected, Christina's treachery had shattered my personal life. Whispering started among friends and acquaintances. While some felt sorry for me, others saw a chance to approach me. Sorting out who actually cared and who was simply interested in the story was tiring now that she was gone. To get through this, I thought, I had to explain everything to everyone. Therefore, facing the relationships I had not yet broken was the first step toward moving ahead. Even after the annulment, there were still traces of acquaintances' unresolved financial issues, and Marco Christina was still attempting to control the story on a social level. Even though she had no legal authority, I made the decision to stop that now. As I seldom did, I began by holding a family meeting that included my children. My family has always been close-knit, complex, and rife with internal politics. But there was no denying that Marco had gone too far. The tension was evident as everyone gathered at my Hamptons house. Marco's typical bluster was conspicuously lacking when he came late. As I stood at the front of the room, speaking to the family, he looked away. A betrayal has occurred, which is why I've summoned you all here. With a firm voice, I started, one that touches on the integrity of this family, as well as my own life. There was silence in the room. I presented the facts: Christina's adultery, Marco's participation, the proof I had found. As I displayed screenshots of the communications, the room erupted in gasps, hard, cold evidence of their dishonesty. Marco attempted to speak, but I glared at him to cut him off. Not only have you betrayed me, I stated firmly. However, you have embarrassed this family with instant effect. My life, my house, and my business are no longer open to you. Think of this as your official exile. The room was in disbelief. In an attempt to protect himself, Marco stumbled, but the harm had already been done. Family members turned away from him one by one, disturbed by what he did. Marco was practically cut off from the family by the conclusion of the conference. After I finished dealing with Marco, as intended, I focused on Christina. She had continued to cause issues even after I had stopped talking. Wearing expensive clothing that she had purchased with my money, she posted about starting over and avoiding unhealthy relationships, and her social media was a flurry of poorly veiled digs at me. It wasn't innocuous, but it was hilarious. I wasn't going to allow her to change the story, since others were beginning to inquire. I made the decision to come out with my truth rather than the scandal. I was able to give my perspective through an exclusive interview with a reputable newspaper. Christina wasn't dragged through the mud by me. I wasn't like that. Rather, I concentrated on resiliency, reconstruction, and regaining trust. I was portrayed in the story as a man who had been mistreated, yet resisted defeat. It struck a chord with people, gaining me respect and sympathy at every function she went to. However, Christina was the target of side-eye and gossip. Her social status fell apart more quickly than I had anticipated, since the public had seen through her facade. Christina made another attempt to get in touch one day. For the first time in years, Mom wrote me a handwritten letter. It was full of excuses, apologies, and pledges to make amends. She expressed in her writing how much she missed our time together, how she discovered what she had lost too late. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. She spoke in a hollow voice, a last-ditch effort to take back control. I let the ashes fall into the fireplace after burning the letter. I had closed that chapter of my life. My narrative was that. Please share your thoughts in the comments section. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Story 3. Because they were preoccupied with my golden brother, my parents disregarded my call for assistance for 6 hours after I was involved in an automobile accident. They are now pleading for my assistance after Daddy abandoned them years ago. Karma struck them severely. Hi there. To select the greatest content for you, we worked really hard. Remember to click the subscribe button if you like them and would want to support us. It does a great job for our channel. Let's begin the video now. OP says, "Hey Reddit," in the beginning. With this, I'm not really sure where to begin. It seems strange to write this since it brings up a lot of things I've tried to ignore, but I feel compelled to share them with someone. Perhaps putting everything in words will improve my ability to process everything. Let's start with some background. Although I am now 24, my narrative began when I was just 17. As a child, I thought my parents were fantastic. Like the sort of parents that always made you feel cared for and supported. They made sure I had all I needed, paid attention, and were constantly active in school activities. However, they always had this quality. Obviously, their favorite was my elder brother, Adam. At first, I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't help but do so. Their golden kid was Adam. Adam had everything he needed. They went out of their way to accommodate Adam's requests. They didn't treat me badly or completely disregard me. Simply put, everything revolved around Adam. I didn't hold it against him, not when I was younger, anyhow. I just came to terms with the fact that this was the situation. However, as I grew older, I found it more difficult to ignore the partiality, and it began to influence my feelings about my position within the family. In any case, I obtained my first real job when I turned 17. I was proud of myself for having some independence at last, while working as a waitress at a restaurant close to my home. Most nights, the shifts were late. I didn't mind that I didn't get off till 1 in the morning. The job is enjoyable, and the advice was helpful. Things start to go wrong at this point. Every night starting at 10 p.m., my parents enforced a rule about their phones. Until 7 a.m., they switched to Do Not Disturb on their phones. They consistently claimed that it was because they needed to sleep and didn't want to be disturbed. We put forth a lot of effort during the day. They would argue that we are entitled to restful sleep. I wasn't very bothered by it at first. It's their phone, their rules, after all, correct? However, I requested that they at least make an exception for me once I began working late shifts. What if something happens? I asked them. What happens if I need you? How did they react? There won't be anything. You're mature enough to look after yourself. In addition, your grandparents are often up late. If you truly need someone, I gave it up. However, I never felt very comfortable with it. What sort of parents would want to delegate their responsibilities to someone else rather than be present for their own child? The night that altered everything then arrived. After a hard shift at work, I was heading home. It was one of those evenings when the restaurant had completely failed. Consumers who are irate and understaffed. The process. I simply wanted to go home and collapse because I was so tired. It happened around halfway home. Unexpectedly, a motorist sped past a red light and collided with me. It was a vicious blow. The sound of glass breaking and metal cracking, it like something from a bad dream. For a brief period, I felt a stinging agony rush through my legs and chest when the airbags deployed. Everything turned dark. I was confused and in so much agony that I was hardly able to think when I regained consciousness. My initial thought was to give my folks a call. I groped for my phone with trembling hands, but I was able to dial their number directly to voicemail. I kept trying, the same outcome. I understood their lack of response. Their phones were turned off. However, I was aware at the time that they weren't supporting me, being aware that they had put their sleep before being accessible to their child. Desperately, something shattered inside me. I began phoning other relatives. Since it was the middle of the night, most people didn't answer. However, I was able to reach my grandparents at last. They made no hesitation at all. They responded, "We're on our way," and hung up as soon as I explained what had happened. I was taken to the hospital as soon as the ambulance came. The following several hours were a haze of physicians' anxiety and suffering. I had underestimated the severity of my injuries. I needed surgery right away since I had several fractures and internal bleeding. I was already getting ready for surgery when my grandparents got there. I felt a little relieved to see their faces. Someone was there for me, at least. However, my parents, it wasn't until the next morning that they even realized I was in the hospital. At 7 a.m., they eventually switched their phones back on. They frantically phoned me. What took place? Are you all right? I told them everything. That I had previously undergone surgery after being involved in a vehicle accident and being taken to the hospital. How did they react? We sincerely apologize. We didn't know. Despite my anger, I made an effort to remain composed. Last night, why didn't you visit the hospital? I inquired. They then revealed the true cause to me. We didn't want to leave Adam alone because he had a difficult night. He gets like that, you know. What I was hearing was unbelievable. Adam disliked being left alone, so my parents had decided to keep him at home. I was in agony and fear as I lay in a hospital bed. I honestly don't recall much of the remainder of that day. I was still feeling dazed following the operation and feeling overtaken by all that had transpired. However, one thing was evident. In the worst manner imaginable, my parents had failed me. I began to question everything I believed to be true about my family that night as I lay in my hospital bed. My parents weren't the wonderful, encouraging individuals I had always thought they were. They prioritized their own comfort and Adam's over their obligation to me. Although that was a difficult pill to take, it was only the start of a lengthy process that would permanently alter my connection with them. I believed that my relationship with my parents may improve after the accident. I hoped that at this point, they would see the impact of their decisions on me and make an effort to make amends. However, things didn't work out that way. To put it mildly, the first few weeks following my discharge from the hospital were stressful. My body was a complete mess. I had internal damage, several fractures, and a protracted recuperation period. The physicians informed me that I would probably have long-term disabilities as a result of the accident, and physical therapy became a regular part of my life. It was emotionally and physically debilitating. Every step of the way, my grandparents supported me. They made sure I had everything I needed, assisted me with therapy, and took me to my doctor's appointments. They didn't gripe or provide justifications. They simply arrived. However, my parents didn't seem to understand how much I had been harmed by their absence during the disaster. Naturally, they offered to assist. They made all the correct statements. Come with us to treatment. Your groceries can be handled by us, and we'll make every effort to compensate you. However, I didn't want their assistance. It felt empty each time they offered. I couldn't stop thinking about how they were absent when it counted most. How, when I was most in need, they had put Adam before me. Adam didn't appear to care at all, which was the worst part. When I first got home, he hardly acknowledged what had happened to me. After giving me a hesitant, "I hope you're feeling better," he immediately returned to his task. I made an effort to let it go, but the more I considered it, the more irate I became. At the age of 20, Adam was more than capable of being left alone for a few hours. However, my parents pretended that he was a young child who couldn't cope with their being gone for a single night. I once questioned my mother about it to make sure she realized how messed up things were. That night, "Why didn't you visit the hospital?" I questioned her. "If you didn't want to be alone, you could have invited Adam along." Her reaction infuriated me. She mentioned he wasn't feeling well that evening. "You are aware of his sensitivity. We didn't want to leave and annoy him." What I was hearing was unbelievable. In actuality, my parents had put Adam's comfort ahead of my security and welfare. How did that go? All right. My parents and I became more and more distant over time. I didn't speak to them anymore unless it was absolutely required. I didn't want to listen to their justifications or expressions of regret. Instead, I threw myself into getting better. I was committed to regaining as much independence as I could, even though it was a gradual and painful process. During this period, my grandparents were my pillar of support. They unwaveringly supported me, attending all of my appointments and encouraging me as I advanced. They even began quietly criticizing my parents' actions. One day, my mom was pulled aside by my grandma, who is typically the family's peacekeeper, and told her that she needed better treatment. "She is not an afterthought. She is your daughter." However, my parents didn't seem to care. They insisted repeatedly that they had learned their lesson and would never allow such an incident to occur again. To be fair, following the accident, they did modify their phone policy. For me, it was too little, too late. Even though my siblings told me they now answer their phones constantly. A few months after the accident, things finally reached a breaking point. My parents sat me down for a family meeting, something we hadn't done since I was a kid. They started with the usual apologies. "We're so sorry for what happened. My dad said we didn't mean to hurt you." My mom chimed in, "We love you and we just want to make things right." But then they pivoted. "You need to start letting us help you." My dad said, "We're your parents and it's our job to take care of you." That's when I lost it. Where was that energy the night of the accident? I asked when I was lying in a hospital bed, scared and hurt. "Where were you?" "Well, that's right. You were at home with Adam because he didn't want to be left alone." They didn't know what to say. My mom started weeping, which simply made me angrier. "Stop sobbing," I said. "Crying doesn't mend anything. It doesn't change the fact that you picked him over me. You constantly chose him over me." For the first time, I watched my parents' expressions transform from remorse to something else. Maybe realization, maybe denial. I couldn't tell, but they didn't dispute with me after that chat. I drew away even farther. I denied their aid with treatment. I assured them I didn't need their money and made all my encounters with them as minimal as possible. It wasn't easy. A part of me wanted to forgive them, to move past everything and reestablish our connection. But every time I thought about that night, about calling their phones over and over and getting nothing but voicemail, I felt that same sensation of abandonment all over again. My grandparents attempted to intervene, of course. "They're your parents," they insisted again. "They adore you. You must figure out how to forgive them." However, I was unable to. In all honesty, I had lost faith in them. I had saved up enough cash by my 20th birthday to leave my parents' place. It was a modest flat, nothing special. It was mine though, and it was liberating. My parents were inconsolable. They pleaded with me to remain, promising to do whatever it needed to make things right. However, I was finished. I require room. You had years to put this right, but you didn't, I told them. You are no longer necessary in my life, they sobbed, naturally. You'll always be my baby, my mother used to say. However, it had lost all significance for me. I really began rebuilding my life, on my own terms. On that day, I believed that I would at last be at peace when I moved out. I reasoned that the distance would help me forget about the tragedy, the betrayal of trust, and all the other things my parents had done to disappoint me. It was effective for a time. I was able to concentrate on myself, my recuperation, my work, and reestablishing my life by living alone. However, Adam's shadow continued to hang over everything long after I left the house. The golden kid had always been Adam. When I was growing up, my parents seemed to think he was perfect, be it academics, athletics, or simply being the ideal son. They never stopped complimenting him, and if he made a mistake, they always found a way to justify it or place the responsibility elsewhere. Their bias seemed to become even more obvious after a while. They were still totally enmeshed in Adam's world, while I was attempting to recover and come to terms with all that had transpired. I didn't hear anything about him at first. I was no longer in close contact with my parents, and I wasn't precisely monitoring Adam's activities. However, my grandparents then began to educate me. Adam is the center of your parents' attention. One day, my grandmother remarked, "They worry about him all the time." She sighed when I asked her what she meant. She muttered incoherently, "He's going through a lot." Adam was experiencing some problems at work, it turned out. He had worked at several different jobs, but none of them appeared to be permanent. According to my grandparents, my parents were always there for him, helping him find new jobs, paying his expenses, and essentially supporting him through everything. It wasn't shocking, but it was annoying to hear. Adam was like this. He constantly turned to our parents for help with his issues, and they were more than willing to provide it. However, learning about the extent my parents had gone to protect him on the night of my accident was what finally made me lose it. During a talk with my grandmother one day, she made a mistake. "Your parents didn't even let Adam know you were in the hospital that night," she remarked. "They wished to avoid upsetting him." What I was hearing was unbelievable. I asked, "Are you saying that Adam was unaware of my accident until the following day?" She gave a nod. "He wasn't in a good position to deal with it," they stated. "They decided it would be best to wait." I was enraged. In addition to staying at home with Adam, rather than visiting the hospital, my parents hadn't even attempted to explain the situation to him. As though his emotions were more significant than my life, they had protected him from the entire circumstance. My connection with my parents became non-existent over the course of the following several months. Every conversation I had with them felt phony, as if they were attempting to win me back without really dealing with the underlying issue. Adam, however, kept relishing his position as a golden kid, even as he sank deeper into his own turmoil. My parents continued to go above and above for him. My mother once phoned me and said, "We should have a family dinner." Too much time has passed. I grudgingly consented, reasoning that it would be best to maintain harmony. However, Adam was the center of attention when I arrived. They talked about his newest ideas, interests, and job hunt during the entire supper. "Adam has been working really hard recently, according to my mom. We're really pleased with him." I pondered silently as I sat there, wondering whether they even remembered what I had gone through. When Adam began dating someone my parents didn't approve of a few years later, that was the tipping point. Jess was her name, and she appeared to be doing well based on what I knew about her. She didn't tolerate my parents and was intelligent and self-reliant. No sense. However, that was precisely what they detested about her. She is a negative role model. During one of our few phone conversations, my mother commented, "Adam is changing in ways that we don't like because of her. Perhaps he should change," I answered. That was not warmly received. My parents tried to ruin Adam and Jess's relationship for months. They said she was attempting to keep him away from the family and was being manipulative and dominating. I didn't miss the irony. My parents were angry that someone else was dragging Adam away from them after they had spent my entire life excluding me in favor of him. Adam finally had enough. He created a new life with Jess, moved out, and stopped communicating with our parents. Seeing it was unreal. I had been the family's black sheep for a very long time, the one who was unappreciative and challenging for retreating. However, their golden kid, Adam, was now acting in the same manner. "Your parents don't know what to do," my grandma stated over the phone one day. "They are devastated by Adam. Perhaps they need to have considered it before attempting to manage his life. Now that Adam is gone, my folks are focusing on me again," I added. "They've started phoning more frequently and left voicemails expressing their want to mend our connection and how much they miss me. They have even begun to send me presents. When I lived under their roof, they never bothered to do these things. They're obviously attempting to replace the gap Adam left, but I don't care. I've been advised to give my grandparents another opportunity. They've grown from their errors. They claim to be attempting to put things right. However, I don't think so. My parents are still the same. Now that their golden child has moved away, they are just desperate. This whole experience has taught me that certain relationships aren't worth preserving. I made my own decisions, and my parents made theirs. Following Adam's separation from my parents, I was aware that it would not be long before they returned their focus to me. I initially hoped they would leave me alone. I thought they would appreciate the fact that I had been so explicit throughout the years that I had no interest in rekindling our connection. I was mistaken. It began sending me brief SMS asking how I was doing and whether I wanted to go out to lunch. They persisted, even though I mostly disregarded them. The phone calls followed. My mother used to leave voicemails that said things like, "Sweetheart, we miss you. Can we have a conversation? I've been thinking about you a lot recently, as has your dad. Give us a call back, please." I didn't answer. Then they intensified their work. They began unexpectedly visiting my residence. The initial instance, both of them were waiting there as I opened the door, looking anxious yet resolute. "All we want to do is chat," my mother said. I shut the door behind me and went outdoors. I had no intention of letting them inside my personal space. "What are you looking for?" I asked, in as bland a tone as I could. "You are missed," my father said. "We desire to make amends even when we are aware of our errors. Can we begin again?" I gazed at them, attempting to comprehend their words. "Make a fresh start. When you've lived your entire life putting someone else before yourself, how can you start over? You cannot simply get here and assume that everything will be well. It doesn't work like that," I said. My mother broke down in tears, which was to be expected. When things didn't go her way, she would always cry. She cried as she continued, "All we want is to be a family again." I gave a head shake. "Your decisions were decided a long time ago. I've moved on." After that, they had little to say. I knew it wasn't over, even after they departed. My grandparents became interested. Next, one day, they phoned me and stated, "Your parents' efforts to put things right are really admirable. Just give them another opportunity, please." I exhaled, attempting to control my annoyance. "The only reason they're trying is because Adam is no longer among them. They wouldn't give a damn about me," I added, "if he hadn't gone." "That is untrue. According to my grandmother, they have always loved you. They just errors." "Grandma," I said again. "When I most needed them, they left me. They have treated me like an afterthought and catered to Adam throughout my life. It's not an error. There is a pattern." For that, she had no response. Next came the present. Packages would arrive at my home at random. Books, clothes, and gift cards. They even once gave me a care box that included my favorite snacks and a handwritten message that read, "We hope you're doing well and we love you." It was odd. This felt forced, as if my parents were attempting to purchase my forgiveness, as they had never been the kind to express their love with presents. I was unsure about what to do with the items. A part of me felt bad, but another half wanted to discard everything. To get stuff out of my flat, I ended up donating the most of it. When they arrived at my grandparents' place on one of my trips, it was a game changer. I had been enjoying the quiet of being with folks who genuinely cared about me while eating supper with my grandparents. My mom's voice could be heard when my grandpa walked to answer the doorbell. "Is she present? We must speak with her." My granny persuaded my grandfather to let them in, even though he was hesitant. As they entered the dining room, I froze. My mom had that excessively contrite smile she often had when she wanted something, and my dad seemed uneasy. "Can we have a conversation?" She looked at me and inquired. I sat back in my chair and set down my fork. "Discuss what? About us?" I said. She said, "Our goal is to make things better. We desire your return to our life." I looked at my grandparents, who were silently observing the incident. Although I wasn't convinced I had what it took, I could sense they wanted me to listen to my parents. "Why now?" I inquired. "Why has it suddenly become so essential to you?" "Because you are loved by us. We always have," according to my dad. "And we acknowledge our faults today." Once more, there it was. Errors. That term is always used to minimize their actions. As like leaving me during one of the most terrifying times in my life was really a small transgression. I said, "It's not about errors. It has to do with trust, and I no longer have faith in you." My mother broke down once more. "We've evolved." I said. She said, "We're working to improve, even though we know we weren't there for you." When I was 17, "Why didn't you make an effort to improve?" I inquired. "Why didn't you care about me till Adam left?" They had no response to that. My grandparents attempted to persuade me to give them another opportunity after they departed. "They're making a lot of effort," my grandmother added. "They should be treated with grace, don't you think?" "Since they have never shown me grace, why should I?" I answered. "All my life, they have prioritized Adam. He's gone, so they're just coming to me now. He cannot be replaced by me." My grandfather gave a contemplative nod, but remained silent. Even though he didn't agree with me, I could see he understood my point of view. I've been even stricter about my limits ever since that evening. Even now and then, my parents still contact me, but I seldom ever reply. I've made up my mind, and I'm not going to change it. Although they want me back in their lives, they are unwilling to put in the necessary effort to mend our connection. They simply want everything to return to as it was when I took what little attention they were willing to offer me. That doesn't interest me. My parents haven't stopped trying to reintegrate me into their life throughout the years. Initially, there were sporadic phone calls, texts, and presents. Then it evolved into more desperate actions, such as unexpectedly arriving or attempting to use my grandparents to shame me. I've come to terms with the fact that they will always try, but I've also come to terms with something else. I will not allow them to return. I realize it may seem heartless, but I've been second place in my own family for far too long. I have created a secure, tranquil existence for myself that is unaffected by their emotional manipulation. Allowing them to return would expose me to the same pain once more, and I simply refuse to do it. A few weeks ago, the most recent phase of their reconnecting effort was completed. I received a lengthy, heartfelt note from my mother. She expressed their longing for me, how they wanted to start again, and how they felt bad about how they treated me. "We've learned from our mistakes, and family is too essential to allow these miscommunications to separate us," she added. One statement toward the end caught my attention the most. "Before it's too late, we simply want to put things right." For a long time, I gazed at that phrase. By too late, what did they mean? Did they fear that I would permanently cut them off, that I would never pardon them? Or did they realize they might not have as much time left to do things right as they did as they grew older? In actuality, I believe it was all of the aforementioned. I read the email and then took some time to reflect on my sentiments before deciding whether or not to reply. I wanted time to consider what they were actually asking of me, since I didn't want to react out of guilt or rage. I kept returning to the same query: why now? It was difficult to overlook the pattern. They were too preoccupied with Adam to get in touch after the disaster. Since they still kept him around, they made no effort to make things right after I moved out. They didn't try to patch things up with me until Adam left them. Even today, their attempts seemed more focused on covering Adam's gap than they did on actually mending our friendship. They appreciated me, therefore they didn't want me back. They needed someone to take his position, therefore they wanted me back. The problem is that I owe them nothing. The most difficult thing to accept has been that I had a persistent sense of guilt for years, as if I was the one who was being unreasonable by not forgiving them. What if they have actually changed? I kept asking myself. Could it be that I am the one clinging to the past? However, I then remember myself of all of their actions, or, more accurately, everything they chose not to do. When I was laying there, terrified and in pain, they didn't arrive at the hospital. When I needed them the most, they didn't prioritize me, and they didn't even notify Adam about the accident for fear of upsetting him. People that genuinely care about you wouldn't act in that way. People who feel comfortable placing you last will act in such a way. My grandparents recently asked whether I would be interested in having a conversation with my parents to resolve the matter. They are sincerely trying to put things right. According to my grandmother, they are prepared to go to any lengths. I know my grandparents mean well, and I adore them. However, I was unable to suppress my frustration. All of stuff I've heard before. They never truly confront what they did. Despite their constant claims of wanting to put things right, I informed her. They simply wish to ignore it and act as though nothing is wrong. But don't you think it's worth giving them a chance? My grandfather said. You know, people can change. I acknowledge that individuals may change, but it doesn't make up for the harm they've already caused. I don't have to allow them back into my life either. I appreciated that they didn't press me after that, but I could sense they were still hoping I would reconsider. I've actually already moved on. My life is excellent today. I've discovered a profession that lets me live comfortably while taking into account my physical limitations. My network of pals that genuinely care about me is limited yet strong. Most significantly, I've discovered serenity. All of that would be at risk if I allowed my parents to return. I would be placing myself in a position to get injured again and revisiting previous wounds. No matter how much they plead or how guilty they attempt to make me feel, I refuse to do that. I'm aware that some individuals may feel that I'm being overly severe. They are my parents, after all, and they have expressed regret for their actions. However, apologizing doesn't always make things better. Years of disregard, partiality, and treachery cannot be reversed. I haven't spoken to Adam in a long time. My grandparents have told me tidbits about him. It seems like he and Jess are still together and have established a successful life together. I can sense that he's content, and to be honest, I'm happy. He benefited from my parents' affection just as much as I did. Although I no longer have any animosity against him, I also don't see the need to get back in touch. We grew up in two very different worlds, and I don't believe we have enough things in common to mend our relationship. What does that mean for my parents and me? Really, nowhere. I'm still being checked out, and they're still trying. I no longer adore them as much as I once did, but I also don't despise them. They are only individuals I once knew, people I can't forgive for their decisions. That's something I've come to terms with. If all of this has taught me anything, it is that family isn't based on blood or titles. Trust, support, and being there for one another in times of need are the foundations of family. My family consists of my grandparents. My family consists of my buddies, my folks. They just belong to my history. Reddit, thank you for reading. I hope this makes you feel less alone if you're in a similar circumstance. Moreover, if you've read this far, I appreciate your patience. Be careful.